Welcome back to another Extreme Book Club video. About a month ago, I got curious what most people's favorite splatterpunk book was, so I scoured across some Reddit threads and I saw a lot of books that I have already covered, like Playground or Womb, but one kept coming up from an author that we have covered before, but a book of his that we have not covered. That author was Kristopher Triana. You might know him as the author of Gone to See the Riverman, a book we have covered on this channel before and people seem to like that one. But the book we are covering by him today is called They All Died Screaming, which is quite the title for a book. But if you read the book, it makes more sense than the gratuitously violent title might suggest. I also want to point out that actually after finishing the book, it really is one of the best splatterpunk books I've ever read. It is genuinely a fantastic read. The book is a very unique twist on the classic apocalypse story, one that I actually kind of love. The story is very splatterpunk-like, but it also shows some pretty good character development and competent writing as compared to some of the other ones we have covered. If you don't know what splatterpunk is, it is the rejection of the modern horror's subtle themes by replacing them with extreme and unabashedly intense themes, which this book embodies that quite well. And if you don't know how we do things on this channel, let me break it down for you. We start out with an intro, which you are listening to now, where we discuss the author and a little bit about the book. Then we get into the summary, which is the bulk of the video, where I summarize the book with some gameplay of some video game in the background. If anything is important on screen, I will let you know that it's not just the background. And finally, we have the analysis, where we do just that, analyze the book. We go over its themes and the message of it. But before we get into it though, it is going to seem like I keep cutting between two characters, and that is because there are two protagonists of this book that we're going to be bouncing between. So just so you know, to not get lost, there are two different stories going on at once. There you go. But without getting too much more into that intro any longer, let us get into Kristopher Triana's They All Died Screaming. The boy watched the man as he started digging the grave. It was small, not the size of a normal grave. The man struggled, and the boy knew what was coming. The man threw the boy the shovel and told him to get to work, while there is still light out at least. The man grabbed his bottle of whiskey and sat by the tree and watched the kid. The kid dug up a clump of dirt, and a little worm came out. He wondered if the man would spare the worm if he saw it. He threw the worm to the ground, and kept digging. He could hear the bitch screaming, something about her cheating boyfriend or something. Chuck puts his book down. He was too drunk to continue to read anyway. So he looked out of his apartment door to see what the commotion was. A woman, and presumably her boyfriend, were arguing in the hallway. "You think these lowlifes wouldn't line up to fuck this?" the woman says as the man walks away. She tells her boyfriend that if he walks away now, it's over. But he just continues walking. And she just tells him to kill himself. The woman turns towards Chuck, and then he could see her fully. She was short, curvy, had stretch marks, and her nose was upturned. She also had wild red dyed hair, but the roots were brown and showing. She looked about the same age as Chuck, about 40 or 45. Chuck thinks that she's just missing the nose ring and she'd look like a skanky warthog. She calls out, "Hey Tony! Now my neighbor's out here because we were arguing." She turns to Chuck after Tony doesn't respond. "Howdy neighbor, wanna get your dick sucked?" Chuck snickers at this. "Hear that, Tony? I'm gonna suck his cock and let him stick it in my ass." Chuck laughed and walked over to the warthog girl. He was always up for that kind of thing. She let him in and she asks if he wants a drink. Her apartment was a mess, even more than his. Ashtrays all over the place, clothes strewn about the floor, and dishes piled in the sink. "Want to smoke?" she asked him. Chuck says, "Sure." And she tells him not bother asking about the blowjob. He says he figured she was lying about that, but he'll hang out here anyway if she wants. She says, well, she's not drunk enough for that kind of thing anyway. She asks how old is Chuck, and he says, as of 3 hours ago, 42. She says, no shit, it's his birthday? He says, yep, but he's not going to do anything special. She says, well, they'll knock back a couple beers to celebrate. He could see her more clearly now. She had tons of scars all around her body. Scars up and down her arms, near her tattoos, some on her forehead and some on her legs. Some look very recent too, still scabby. She says she's 45 and got nothing to show for it either. No boyfriend as of a couple minutes ago, no real career, no family, no nothing. Chuck says, well, there's more to life than love anyway. She says, maybe, but she hardly even has a job. she's just a shitty cashier. Chuck says, well, it could be worse. She says she doesn't want to be cheered up, and Chuck says, well, he wasn't trying to. He notices her eyes were small and beady. These weren't the eyes of a young girl full of hope for life. These were the eyes of a woman who had seen too much in life. She asks Chuck what he does for a living, and he says, as of right now, nothing. He was fired a few days ago from his job at an electronics warehouse. She says, oh, was it layoffs? But he says, nah, it was for drinking on the job and stealing an HD TV he was going to pawn off. She says, well, she respects his honesty at least. Something she doesn't see in a lot of men nowadays. But Chuck says, nah, he steals on principle. He gets minimum wage for doing back-breaking work. Then he gets the scraps of scraps. So he steals from big businesses to stick it to the man. He asks if she has a problem with drinking with a thief. And she says, not unless he has a problem drinking with an old tramp. He says, well, he never has before, as they kick back and drink some more. She says her name is Leslie. The boy looked around. He couldn't find his mother. He had just left her side for a split second while he looked in the fountain to look for quarters he could use at the arcade. But when he came back to where his mom was, near the shoe store, she was gone. The mall suddenly felt a lot bigger. He went in several stores whispering, "Mom?" around. He didn't want any of the other adults to know he was missing his mother. He wished he was like He-Man, strong and independent, but he was scared. He ran out of the store and cursed himself that he didn't stand near his mom like she said. But he was almost 10 and he didn't want to be seen with mommy. As he ran out of the store, he accidentally bumps into a middle-aged man in a police uniform and he puts his hand on his shoulder. "Whoa there, kid, you alright? Where's your parents?" The boy started stammering that he can't find his mom. She's got red hair, a bright red coat, and the man says, he thought so. That nice little redhead he met. The mom has been looking everywhere for him. Just come with him. The man smiled a toothy grin of yellow jagged teeth like a jack-o'-lantern. The man's positive attitude made the boy calm down a bit. The man says that his mom is over in the mall office building. Just follow him. They walked outside the mall hand in hand, and the boy asks, "Where are we going?" The man says he told him. His mom is just in a short drive away in the mall office building. They get to a big van, and the man helps the kid in. He sits down, and the van has an ashtray, and it's lined with wet magazines, and behind him, a hunting rifle. He figured a mall cop would have a slick, small white car, not this piece of junk. His hands started trembling once again. The man got to his side of the van and got in. He says he's going to drive the kid to the office, but first he's got to grab his medicine from the kid's side of the van first. He reaches over the kid and quickly grabs him and puts a rag over his mouth forcefully. A chemical smell fills the boy's nostrils as he struggles, but the man was too strong. The boy falls into the deep abyss of forced sleep. Chuck was listening to his friend Eugene at the bar. He was describing how all the robocalls he's been getting had a 6 in the number. "See, man, they're harassing me. They all have the number 6 in them, like the number of the beast." Eugene was going on and on about some conspiracy theory. His eyes looked more bug-eyed than usual today. He was a known drug user, though, so who knows. While this was going on, Chuck asks the barman for another beer as he ogles a blonde on the other side of the bar. He has a sad realization that, at his age of 42, he'll probably never fuck a teenager again. The girl looked 20, which was close enough, though. Maybe she was one of those prostitutes that he'd have sex with down by the docks. Eugene continued that this was Big Pharma trying to get him with these calls. Chuck says, "Wait, he thought it was the Satanists with the number 6. Eugene smugly smiles and says, "Big Pharma, Satanists, billionaires, they're all in the same league, man. They will lead the apocalypse." Chuck rolled his eyes. Eugene says he has to protect his family from these guys, and by family, he means his mother, who he still lives with even though he's 35. In the 2 years that Chuck has known Eugene, he's had 0 girlfriends and 0 jobs. "I'm telling you, man, they're harassing me." The barman threw down a beer and Chuck catches it. "Thanks, barman," he says. Chuck wasn't being rude. That is what the barkeep legit liked to be called. Barman. Chuck wished he was outdoors right now, though. He needed a cigarette every couple hours or he got anxious. Sounds like my dad. Chuck just nods his head and agrees with whatever Eugene is saying. He tried to convince him to get therapy a while back, but Eugene thinks that therapy is a way of brainwashing people into conformity. He would claim that the only therapy he needs is 3 spoonfuls of kratom in the morning. Sounds like my stepdad. "Hey, I saw you go into room 213 last night with that lady. Be careful," Eugene says to Chuck, and Chuck asks why. Eugene says that lady has a revolving door for a pussy. Chuck asks, why he should care once again. Eugene says he could get an STD. Chuck says he doesn't catch diseases, STDs or otherwise, but he's not surprised Eugene would say that. He's a germaphobe. Eugene says he wouldn't fuck her with his worst enemy's dick. Chuck seriously doubts that. He feels that if any woman showed any interest in Eugene, he would worship the ground she walked on for the rest of his life. Sounds like me. Sorry, I'm gonna stop with that joke now. Chuck tries to get through to Eugene by asking if he ever wants to go anywhere in life. Live a little, you know? Chuck wants him to stop living in his pitiful little existence where he holds on to dear life for a fleeting, or rather, already gone, childhood. For a second, it seemed like Chuck was getting through to him, but Eugene just scoffs and says, Chuck will see soon. They'll all see soon. Eugene gets up and tells the barman to put it on his tab as he leaves. After which, the TV mounted on the wall talks about how all the ice caps are melting due to global warming. As the TV rings out, Chuck asks the barman if he's looking for any new hires. They exchange a pleasant conversation, and barman says it's not up to him. See that sign outside? It says Rudy's Bar. He just works here. Barman says, speaking of a job though, how's he gonna pay for alcohol? For life in general? Chuck says, paying for alcohol and for life is the same thing nowadays. Chuck leaves the bar and into the hot August night. The city smells like garbage because the garbage strike that had started a week or two ago. He got back to his apartment with his graying chest hair sticking to his chest, and when he got up to his floor, Leslie was hanging out in her apartment saying on the phone, yeah, make that a large pepperoni. Oh, and some fries. And do you guys have beer there? No? Well, can you pick some up before you deliver the pizza? Chuck smiles, and she tells the guy over the phone to hurry up. She puts her arm around Chuck and greets him like they've known each other forever. She slurs her words and asks, what's your name again? He says, it's Chuck. And she says, that's right. She invites him in, but Chuck grabs a bit of scotch from his apartment before he does so. Chuck mentions that she's in a better mood today, and she says, yeah, it's better when she doesn't have to go to work and hand out sample cups or whatever. She calls all the customers pigs as she drinks the scotch. She says sometimes she just wishes everybody died. Chuck asks what about her friends or relatives. She says she doesn't have any of those left. Even the other people in this apartment building are disgusting, she says, except for you, Chuck. It was the classic alcoholic, seesawing between happy and sad when she drinks. Chuck just didn't want her to cry, but he knew one way to cheer her up. He says, you know, the best way to get over one guy is to get under another. Soon after, they forgot all about the pizza, but were reminded when the doorbell rang. They were having sex when it did. Leslie bent over the counter. Leave it, Chuck says, but Leslie says, fuck that, I'm hungry. They open the door and the delivery boy sees Leslie half naked. She grabs the pizza and eats 3 slices before they continue and climax. I needed that, she said. Chuck asks if she said that about the pizza or the sex, and she just smiles as a reply. The boy woke up in a cage, like for dogs, a bowl of mac and cheese at his feet. It was dark and musty. The word played over and over in his head. Kidnapped. It made him feel sick. He was a POW like Rambo. He was almost a teenager though, he thought. He always wanted more autonomy from his parents, but now he wanted nothing more than to see his mom. As the door opened, the boy hit his head on the top of the cage. The man walked down the stairs in a wife beater and in old cowboy boots. The man was the same man who kidnapped him. Relax, kid, I ain't gonna rape you. I ain't a pervert, and I ain't gonna hurt you none either, unless you make me. The boy sobs and the man kicks the cage, and he says just to listen then. The boy wanted to close his eyes and shut his ears. Anything to get away from this situation. The man says he knows the kid's scared, and as for his first day here, he has no work for the kid. But that is why the kid's here. To work. The man asks him his age, and the kid says 9. The man says, well, by the time he was 9, his father made him work on the farm. The kid is going to be just as obedient as he was when he was young. The man says he knows the kid's scared, so just nod if he agrees. The kid does so. The man says, okay. Soon, he'll bring down a cot for the kid to sleep on in the basement, but they have to establish a trust. So, rest up for his first day. The man then goes back up the stairs and leaves the kid alone. The next day, the only thing the kid saw were pigs. A ton of them. He was on a farm. The house was smaller than he expected, but it was a farmhouse with a barn in the back surrounded by woods as far as he could see. The kid knew he could outrun the man, but he didn't know where he could even go. Plus, the van he brought here had a hunting rifle in it, and it was still here. The man slapped the metal instrument on the table in front of the boy. This here is the bone saw, and that's the meat grinder. For our first day, you're going to learn how to take them apart and put them back together. Chuck thought that she had to be new to this apartment building. The girl was young, probably around 20. Jailbait, he thought. Man, he wanted her bad. But there's no way girls her age saw Chuck in a sexual way. He might as well be a eunuch to her. He went to the bathroom and masturbated. He left his apartment as a child jumped down the stairs like Tarzan. He knew it was happy hour down at Rudy's though, so he put on his sunglasses and made his way down to the bar. As he walks there, he sees something behind a dumpster. It was too big to be a dog, and as he notices it, the shape behind the dumpster says, "You got a smoke, buddy?" The voice was really raspy, and Chuck took out his pack of cigarettes and gave him one that he found on the ground. The man was in a makeshift wheelchair, a wooden plank with shopping cart wheels attached. He had a trucker hat on it that said, "Fuck sluts, 'cause that's all that's left." He then takes out a flask with a Confederate flag on it. Chuck says, "This guy's a long ways away from Dixie." The man in the wheelchair says, "He just picked up this flask in Mississippi. A flask is a flask, he doesn't care what's on it." The man was clearly homeless. The man asks, "Where's Chuck going?" And Chuck says he's going to Rudy's place to get drunk if he wants to join. The man says, "Shit, you buying?" Chuck felt charitable today, and somehow he had money for this. "I'm Chuck. What's your name?" "My name's Shitty." Chuck looks at him strangely, but continues to Rudy's. They get in there, and Chuck introduces Shitty. Barman asks, "Is that his real name? And if so, what is it, like Shitty Smith? Shitty Johnson? What?" And he just says, "Nah, Shitty." Like Cher. Chuck laughs. Barman says, "Well, Shitty, you smell like shit. I'm gonna spray you with some deodorant." He does so, and Eugene walks into the bar and sits down next to Chuck. "People are dying, Chuck." Chuck ignores him and says, "This here's Shitty." Shitty extends his hand, but Eugene recoils. Chuck tells Shitty not to take it personally. Eugene's a germaphobe. Eugene tells Chuck that this is serious. There's a miasma of disease coming down from Canada. Some viral infection that's killing people. Hasn't Chuck seen the news? Chuck says he doesn't even own a TV. Shitty says that Eugene isn't even lying. He knows about that disease. It's called the Scream. Eugene says, yeah, that's what they're calling it now. He thinks it's a gas, the government testing it on people. Both of them ignored his theory, and Shitty says, yeah, he saw someone the other day with it. A homeless woman who sells friendship bracelets on the side of the road. Just started screaming bloody murder out of nowhere. Her mouth had little bits of yellow around it like pus, and her eyes bloodshot. She started pulling her hair out. Shitty says he tried to help, but he rolled away when he realized it was futile. No one said anything though, because the woman was homeless. It wasn't on any news sites or anything. Barman says, yep, that's all true. And the lady wasn't just crazy. She had jaundiced skin and died from it. Eugene says it's become an epidemic. But if it spreads to cities like this, it could become a pandemic. Chuck says, back up. It kills you? How does screaming kill you? Barman says that people say once you catch it, however you catch it, whether that be airborne, rats, birds, whatever, you can't stop screaming. You scream bloody murder and go crazy. You can't eat or drink or sleep because you just can't stop screaming. That's what the disease does. Most cases end in suicide before that ever happens, though. Jesus Christ, Chuck says. Praise the Lord, Jetty says. The kid shoveled hay as he looked over at the man. He'd seen the man do weird things before in the past couple months, said he'd been kidnapped, but this was a whole new level of crazy. The man was naked and covered in mud with the pigs. The kid wondered what was going on as he saw the man's weird form. His skin was almost tinted green in spots. But as he was thinking this, the man screamed, and so did the pig in unison to snap the kid out of it. The man was thrusting wildly into the pig as it bleated. The kid didn't know much about sex, but he knew it when he saw it. The man's face contorted into a twisted smile when he saw the kid shoveling hay. Love! The man shouted at the kid. Leslie was too drunk to have sex. Chuck tries to convince her, but she just lies there and asks for food instead as she drinks alcohol. Chuck says he ain't making shit, but Leslie says, please, Chucky. Chuck tells her to go fuck herself, and an argument ensues. A bunch of other tenants in the apartment building bang on walls and the ceiling to get Leslie to stop. Shut up, you fucking whore! People are trying to sleep! One called out. She leaned out the window for some reason and told the neighbor to, quote, suck her dick. Chuck grabs her so she doesn't fall out the window, and she asks, well, let's go get something then. She doesn't have to cook. She wants some french fries. Chuck says it's 1 a.m. No place is open. Leslie says she knows a diner that's open until 2 a.m. Chuck sighs. If he didn't go with her, she'd probably just go by herself and get hit by a car or something. He tells her to go get dressed. She comes out with a Texas Chainsaw Massacre shirt on and they get going. They walk to the diner past a huge pack of rats as Chuck says, man, they're taking over the city almost. They get there and it was actually still pretty lively despite it being 1 a.m. An annoyed waitress comes by and asks for their order and Leslie almost springs awake and says, "French fries!" loudly, enough to make the waitress scowl. Chuck says, man, she's hungry, he guesses. But she says she just wants to be, quote, filled up. Chuck asks if she means with food, but she says, everything. She wants her mouth full of food, belly full of vodka, her lungs full of smoke, and her snatch full of dick. 2 or 3 if that's what it takes. Anything to get rid of the emptiness. There was a strange sadness when she said that, but Chuck ignored it. The waitress brought the plates over and Leslie once again shouts out, "French fries!" Leslie slides her hand under the table and starts giving Chuck a hand job as she eats. "Tell me when," she says after a while of eating, and Chuck tells her, and as she does, she takes a fistful of French fries and puts it near his penis, and well, he comes on the French fries. She takes them back up and eats them. How lovely. She puts her head on his shoulder, like they were teenagers in love, and they left after they were done. The next day, Chuck was heading down the apartment stairs when he saw that young 20-something blonde again. He stepped over her and looked down her shirt, but it was too tight to see anything. He thinks, man, he wants to have sex with her so bad. She looks up at him after he steps over her and says, "Hey, do you smoke?" Her voice like a little kiss. He pulls out his cigarettes, but she says, no, like weed. She hasn't been able to score any since she moved here, and she needs a joint bad. Chuck says no, he doesn't smoke weed, but he knows a guy who does, as he wonders why a girl this cute couldn't score weed easily. She says, yay, can we meet him today? Chuck says, probably not, he's a bit paranoid. He thought to himself, well, he'd never get to fuck this girl, but maybe if he got on her good side, he could get her to send him nudes or something. She did just ask a stranger for drugs after all, so maybe she was a troubled youth. Troubled youths were always easier, he thinks. She asks what is it going to cost her, but Chuck says, hasn't she ever seen an after-school special? The first one's always free. He goes up to Eugene, and Eugene's mom starts freaking out until Eugene comes to the door and lets him in. Chuck asks for some weed, but Eugene says, shh, quiet down. The feds or the DEA could have his place tapped or something. Chuck rolls his eyes, but played nice because today he needed something from Eugene. He tells Eugene to come over to his house then. As Eugene enters, a wave of cigarette smoke hits him. Eugene tells Chuck that he should really clean this place. This kind of filth can attract rats, and who knows what kind of diseases they carry. Chuck says he does not care. Eugene says that some people online say that the rats might be carrying the scream, or maybe it's some long-dead illness like the bubonic plague come back to haunt humanity. Eugene pulls out some bud from his pocket and asks, since when does Chuck smoke? Chuck says it's for a friend. Eugene asks if it's for that warthog lady across the hall, and Chuck lies and says, yeah, it is. Eugene says, be careful. She's loud and a slut and a raging alcoholic. But before the conversation could continue, a shrill scream from a man came from the hallway. The fuck? Chuck says as they leave the apartment. Chuck says he's got to see this, but Eugene says, stop, man, what if it's the scream? Chuck says he's going to see anyway, and he opens the door. On the other end of the hallway, a large black man was kicking holes in the walls, screaming. Not as if he was angry, but a scream filled with pure terror almost. His skin was a little yellow, and he was covered in pollen, his knuckles bloody. Chuck yells for someone to call the police, but a woman, probably the large man's wife, says not to. He's got 3 prios. The cops will arrest him and throw away the key. Chuck then says for someone to call the paramedics then. But before anything else happens, the man jumps down the stairs, like dolphin diving in Black Ops 2. Then it was the woman who screamed. The sound had been strangely gentle, like an egg cracking. But a little while later, now it was the woman sobbing on the ground floor as paramedics zipped up the man's body and carried him away. Chuck went up to a young paramedic and asked, what happened? The young paramedic said, well, it could have been an aneurysm. They've been known to be so painful, some people do stuff like this. Chuck says he thinks it was the scream. Could it have been that? The young paramedic looks away, not confirming or denying the question. Chuck asks if the paramedic has seen a lot of this recently. He once again says nothing. Chuck says he's not trying to harass him or anything. He just wants to know if this is getting bad so he can leave and go to... The paramedic cuts him off and says, and go where? There have been cases from California to Maine. People all over have had this sort of thing happen. Chuck gets in close and says what Eugene says. So it's becoming a pandemic? The paramedic says, no, not really. It's always one person at a time randomly, not a mass wave of people like a pandemic. People have been committing suicide because they cannot stop screaming. But weirdly, it's never a normal suicide either, like a gunshot. There's always some brutal suicide, like the man who just jumped down the stairs. Chuck says he has to know more. But the paramedic says if people know what's going on, he'd wish they'd tell him too. The boy woke up from a dream about pigs. The man came downstairs and told him to rise and shine. Today, he was going to learn to feed the veal. The boy shot up, scared. I'll do anything else. I'll feed the hogs or anything. The man raised his hand as if he was going to hit the boy, but he didn't follow through. He said, this time, it's a warning. The boy has to learn eventually to feed the veal. So today, he's gonna. The boy got up and put on his flannel and work boots as he went upstairs. The man followed him and gave him 2 bottles with rubber nipples. He tells the boy that he has to hold the bottles filled with this low-calcium milk up to the veal's mouth so that they can drink it. It makes them anemic. It makes the meat more tender that way. He says if the kid's good, he'll give him some extra time tonight to play with the piggies and read his comics and stuff. He says he'll give the boy breakfast once he feeds the veals their breakfast. The boy leaves the house and goes to the barn. He stood outside the barn and he could hear the veal bray, but he didn't want to enter. The sun started coming up and he wondered how long he'd been standing there. He enters the key into the lock and goes inside. It was uncomfortably hot, and it smelled like piss, shit, and vomit in there. He couldn't look them in the eye. But as he walked, he heard, "Please, little boy, you gotta help us." One of the women was chained and pleading with him. He tried to ignore her as he was in a similar position to these veal, imprisoned. A little more freedom than these women, but sure, they were pretty much in the same boat. He looked over to another one, a brunette, and gave her a bottle too. But she was chained in such a way that it looked like she was doing a cannonball position in the cage, so she couldn't move. Another veal cried for him to help her, but he just whispered, "I can't." She was no older than 15. Her skin tanned bronze, but now she suckled the teat of a milk bottle as if she was an infant again in the barn. Later, she would piss and shit herself in that cage too. Later that day, the sour smell emanated off the man in the kitchen. "Boy, I'm trying to be nice. You done a good day's work, and I want to feed you something you lack. So what do you want me to cook for you?" The boy had been eating PB&J sandwiches and bananas for every meal for months now. So he thought maybe he wanted his favorite meal he used to have when he was with his parents. Maybe some bacon and egg. The boy started, but the man slammed the table and says, "No pork will ever touch your fork. You understand, boy?" The man goes into a tirade how he used to work in a slaughterhouse. 1,000 pigs a day killed in an instant. These beautiful creatures slaughtered with nothing but a stun gun and butcher knives. They are put into baths to melt their skin and get the meat out. A single tear ran down the man's cheek. 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. These beautiful creatures. "So kid," the man kept saying, tears streaming down his cheeks, "you still want bacon?" The boy shook his head. The man dried his tears and said, "Good. You're learning, kid. You're learning." Chuck and Leslie got Arby's, a bunch of French fries and beef and cheddar sandwiches in particular, though she didn't jerk Chuck off in the fries this time. Once they got home, Leslie took the bun off of the beef and cheddar and rubbed the sandwich against her labia. Quick note, what the fuck? She made Chuck eat her out as well as the sandwich, and she smeared grease on her naked body. "Please, Chuck, I need you," she said in a tender voice she'd not heard her use before. He took the beef and cheddar and fisted her with it, and she quietly said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." I'm just gonna let this scene linger in your head for a second before we continue. The doorbell rang as Leslie had a mouthful of Chuck, and Leslie says, "Fuck 'em, let's continue." Chuck says he wants to know who it is. He pulls up his pants and opens the door. The 20-year-old blonde woman stood waiting outside. "I didn't know how to reach you, so I just came by," she said. She wanted her weed. Leslie gave her the stink eye as Chuck let her in. "I don't even know your name," Chuck asked the girl. It's Brittany," she replied. "Like the Spears," Leslie says, forcing a smile, and Brittany forced one back. They hated each other, Chuck could tell. Leslie asks if she heard that poor fucker die the other day in the hallway. And Brittany says, yeah, when she got home from school, she heard about it. School? How old are you? Chuck asks as he gives her the joints. 17, she says. Old enough for you, right, Chucky? Leslie says with a shitting grin. Chuck ignores her comment, and Leslie says that she should leave, because the two adults have better things to do than deal dope to kiddies. Chuck tells her to shut the fuck up, and Brittany leaves. She asks if Chuck is going to try to fuck her after, and Chuck says, yep, first chance he gets. She says, men are all the same. Just want their dick wet. Chuck asks Leslie why she brought up the Scream dead guy. She said she was just trying to make conversation. People start jumping out of windows and downstairs, and she's not supposed to talk about it. Chuck just says, yeah, well, the Scream will do that to you. Leslie says she don't need no Scream to jump out a window. She shows her scars, and Chuck looks at her inquisitively. Tried to kill myself about half a year ago, she says. Chuck asks what happened, and Leslie says why does he care? Not like he's her boyfriend or anything. Chuck says, well, he still cares, though. She says, fuck it, she might as well tell him. She used to have a husband and a few kids. One was 3 and the other was 5. Wayne, her husband's name, and he treated her nice. Wayne was her husband's name, and he treated her nice. They had a nice house, 2 cars, the real American dream. She even worked at a bank as a teller. Well, Wayne had depression. Sometimes it got bad enough where he had to stay in hospitals. Every time he went to a hospital, she grew more and more annoyed at him. She said she was busting her ass off while he was lying around because he was sad. Well, Wayne, always depressed and never wanting to have sex, annoyed her. So this guy down at the bank who was always flirting with Leslie once went out for drinks with her, and she ended up fucking him. Then it became a normal thing. Well, one night, they went to that diner and then they had sex in the bathroom. Well, a boy somehow didn't notice that someone was in there, opened up the door to the diner bathroom, and screamed. His mom had to call the police. So, Leslie was put on a sex offender list. She then had to make one of the hardest decisions of her life. Tell Wayne about her cheating, or try to hide it. But her being on the registry would make it hard to hide it. So, she figured she'd tell him, out of respect. She went home that day and told him, and he said nothing. No explosion, no anger, and that almost made it worse. Then he really didn't do anything. He didn't want to go back to the hospital, and he didn't even want to get out of bed. So, Leslie would get in his face and laugh at what a weak man he was, not exploding at her for cheating. Well, one day, she came home from work, and when she got into the house, it was eerily quiet. She went back upstairs, and there in the bed were her husband and 2 children, all holding hands. All gone. She checked their pulses, and her life was completely destroyed in that instant. She jumped out the window screaming, trying to kill herself. But she didn't. She only broke a leg and got a concussion, as well as all the scars. God wouldn't let her die, though. She figured out later that he fed her kids rat poison for lunch that day. How's that for depressed, she thinks. She never thought she'd be marrying a murderer, and even if she did, definitely not her own children. She sniffs after the story, shaking, almost crying. She says for Chuck to just fuck the memories away, please. Later that night, Chuck brought Leslie to the bar. She cleaned up nice, actually taking a shower and wearing makeup, which were both rare for her. Even Eugene looked at her when she came in, even though he always talked shit about her behind her back. Shitty, 2 Italian guys, and 2 prostitutes from the docks were also sitting at the bar. Shitty was talking to the 2 Italian guys about the scream in the corner when he notices Chuck. Hey, Big Chuck, he says. They all begin to talk about the scream, when Barman says, yeah, he heard about the stair jumper at his apartment building. He says maybe they should all leave the city, just to get away from it all. Shitty says it's like this all over the country. Nowhere to go. He's at least free, like a real patriot, not being tied down to a house. Barman says, Shitty, you sleep in your own piss. Barman says, honestly, he doesn't even care that people are dying from the shit, though. The less people, the smaller the carbon footprint humanity has. He even heard that the ice caps melting was actually the thing that released the scream itself. Like some long-dead disease was melted out of it. Which actually happened before in the real world, by the way. So, if a bunch of people die, no big deal for him. Everyone at the bar chastises Barman for being cruel. But before they can say anything else, a scream rings out. One of the Italian guys begins screaming and tearing into one of the prostitutes near him, ripping her hair out of her head as she screamed, "What the fuck?" Barman yelled as he took out his phone and called 911. Other people watched or took videos with their phones. Eugene already ran out of the store as Shitty gawked. Chuck realizes he needs to stop her. Maybe if he broke it up, Barman would give him a job, or at least go easy on him with his tab. Leslie grabbed Chuck as he started to go over and asks, "Are you stupid? This is the Scream. It's a contagious disease." Before she could continue, though, a prostitute who was on the ground with her hair ripped out began to scream just like the Italian guy. All hell was breaking loose. The two began dancing in a miasma of flesh getting torn apart, ripping each other's faces open and breaking bones like wild animals in a frenzy. The woman got her fingers in the Italian guy's eyes, and a sickening pop ran out. Someone vomited in the crowd, watching as Barman tried to get between the two as police sirens blared. The Italian guy, now without eyeballs, backhands Barman, and he gets crumpled to the ground despite Barman being huge. Before anything else happened, though, the other Italian guy started screaming. The boy thought the woman was far too old to be Veal. Even he could tell that. So why was she here? She could be old enough to be his mother, something he didn't want to think about. Besides, he was having trouble even remembering his old life before the farm. Even when he did remember, he didn't like to. It distracted him from his work. The man threw the older woman into the barn. "The bitch was there when I found the other Veal, so I had to gas her too." That is what the man called it when he put the chemicals in the rag and kidnaps people. The same way he kidnapped the boy. How many years ago was that now? He can't really remember. He is taller and stronger now, though. He has hair in places he didn't before, and now he has oily pimples. He has taken to wearing the Veal's clothes after the man stripped them. It was all women's clothes, but the boy didn't mind too much. The man tells the old Veal to take off her clothes. She chokes back tears, but the man says, "Calm down, he ain't no rapist." She does so and strips. She has a bunch of hair all over her vagina that was a different color than her normal golden blonde hair. The man looks over to the boy and says, "This one's carpet doesn't match the drapes," and he laughs. The kid laughs too, the man's good mood rubbing off on him. They shave the woman down fully, even her hair on her head, and she cries as they do that. After which, the man sits the boy down and says, "You know, when I took you all those years ago, you had your school ID in your bag. It had your name, address, and birth date on it." The boy sat there confused. "July 31st. That's today. You turned 13 today, boy." The boy choked back tears. 13. A teenager. He had been here for 4 years now. His old life felt so far away, like a fleeting memory. He can hardly remember what his parents even looked like anymore. The man says when he was 13, his father took him hunting. It was a rite of passage of sorts. He always wanted to go hunting before 13, but after he finally did it, he knew his father was right. He wasn't a man until he was 13. He says he saw a huge buck with his father that day, and he looks away as if in happy reminiscence. "I'll never forget that birthday," the man says. He pulls out a hunting knife and gives it to the kid and points it to the old Veal in the corner. "See what I'm getting at, kid? Happy birthday." Chuck, Barman, Shitty, Leslie, and the prostitute escape out of the emergency exit. The prostitute looks at Barman's face as it was bloody from the hit he took. "Leave me alone, fuckface Nightingale, I'm fine." The prostitute says her name is Angel, and then she says, "Fuck you, I was only trying to help." Leslie tells them both to shut the fuck up. They gotta get out of here. Barman says the screamers seemed more interested in fighting each other than chasing them out the back door. All the screamers only attacked each other. Barman says he can't leave the bar though. But Leslie says, "You're gonna die if you stay here." The siren they heard earlier blares right past them as this is happening. They just kept driving, Barman says. Eugene, who was hiding behind a dumpster this whole time, says, "Yeah, that's because it's happening all over the city now." Chuck tells him to shut the fuck up with the conspiracy theories, but before anything else, another scream rings out. This was happening. Right now. Leslie grabs Chuck's arm, wanting to go home. There were fires getting set all over the city. They could smell them. As Chuck and Leslie leave, Eugene says to wait up because he doesn't want to go home alone. Barman says he lives a lot further than them and won't make it. Angel says she doesn't want to be alone either. Leslie didn't want to gather every loser from the bar and was staring holes into Chuck. But Chuck figures there would be safety in numbers. Chuck laughs and says, "Well, party at our place, I guess." "What you waiting for, kid?" the man said to him. The kid's mouth was dry and his hands were sweaty with the knife. The man tells him just to pull her hair back and slit her throat. Same way humans kill pigs, he says. The kid knew he had to do it. He didn't want to disappoint the man. In fact, having the man proud of him was usually all he needed. Well, at least the praise and the snacks he was given if he did. "I know it's the first big step, kid, but I believe in you," the man says. The boy went over to the older woman who was crying in the corner. She pleaded that she just had a baby. "Please." The kid took her hair and for some reason he instinctively cupped her boob and milk dripped out. The boy thought it was pus. She's sick or something. Pus is coming out of her breasts. The man says, "Well, I guess the old veal wasn't lying. That there is titty milk, like a cow feeding her young." The man gets down and sucks on her breast and says that they cannot kill this one actually. All humans are breastfed. In fact, the man says he sucked on his mother tits for years, and then when she was all dried up, she had his brother who died from SIDS. So he was on his mother's milk until he was 10 actually. And this lady is gonna feed them both for a while. All the testosterone the boy had been building up to kill her deflated. The man says, "Oh, don't give him the puppy dog eyes. He can still kill one." The newest veal. The daughter of this old one. The old veal started screaming, but the man knees her in the stomach. The boy went to go get the veal and thought how he had grown closer to the man as he taught him how to do everything on the farm. The man was the boy's only companion. He used to feel close to the veal as they were in the same situation, but not really anymore. Now he felt closer to the man. He wanted to make the man proud, but the veal to him were lower than the pigs. He got to the veal and got her out of her cage. "Where am I? Who are you? Where's my mom? Don't hurt me!" she shouted. This sort of excited and aroused the boy. It was almost as if the veal themselves saw his transformation. They used to beg little boy to help them, but now they saw the boy as one of their captors. That excited him. He took a cattle prod and shocked her to get her out of the cage. Burning dumpsters lined the streets as well as dented trash cans as police sirens blared. Barman asks what happened. Before today, it was just one or two people turning into screamers, but now people are turning in huge groups. "It's the second phase," Eugene says as everyone tells him to shut up. Leslie grabs his collar as he's rambling about chemtrails and stuff, and Chuck separates them and says Leslie needs to leave Eugene alone. But Eugene also needs to shut the fuck up. Chuck says they should go to Nishant's liquor store before they go home. It's actually on the way. Angel, the prostitute, says she can't believe that he wants booze at a time like this. Barman laughs and says he's known Chuck for long enough to believe him. As they are talking, a high-pitched scream rips through the air. Angel grabs onto Eugene's arm, which of course he didn't seem to mind, as a small kid runs out of the alleyway with Incredible Hulk underwear on, screaming, clearly infected with the scream. Eugene says they should probably put him out of his misery. Barman kicks a trash can to Eugene and says, "What, are you gonna do it? Beat the child to death with a trash can? What if there's a cure eventually? They can't just murder every screamer they come across." Leslie slowly starts towards the boy, but Chuck grabs her arm. Chuck hadn't even considered the emotional toll of seeing a child like this and how it would affect Leslie after her own children died. She slowly whispers, "I think you're right, Chuck. We need to go to the liquor store." The boy jumped away into the street and got hit by a car, causing the car to crash. They walked away to get to the liquor store, and Angel asks what kind of name is Nishant for a liquor store. Chuck says, well, it's the owner's name. He's from India. Eugene says, "Oh, great. It's possible that him and the other Muslims are the ones that are doing all of this to us." Chuck tells him to shut the fuck up, and besides, most people in India aren't Muslims, they practice Hinduism. They enter the store, and Chuck calls out, "Hello?" But the racking of a pump-action shotgun causes them all to freeze. Nishant says he isn't taking any chances with the looters right now. Chuck and Leslie say they come in here all the time. There's no need for this. He continues to point the shotgun at the group and asks, what about the rest of them? He says they're going over to their apartment building if Nishant wants to join them. Nishant says, "No way. This is just like in LA in '92. He's not leaving his shop." They hand over the money for the liquor, and as a transformer pops in the background, Barman, who took one of the bottles, dropped one in surprise. Nishant racks his shotgun again and tells them all to get out. They all agree and start to leave. But Eugene walks up to him and says, "Don't you see this is what they want us to do, man? They want us to turn on each other." He takes a step closer to Nishant to calm him down, but he stepped a little too quick. Nishant, perceiving a threat, let loose with the shotgun and a deafening boom rang out. Chuck's ears were ringing and the smell of cordite dominated the room. Eugene had been hit by a small bit of the shotgun blast. It wasn't a direct hit, but it tore his face off almost. Angel screamed and jogged in place as Leslie screamed. Chuck screamed to Nishant that they're leaving! Don't shoot! They're just gonna grab Eugene's body and leave! Barman and Chuck grabbed Eugene and dragged him out of the store. Surprisingly, he was still breathing, though his face was nearly destroyed. Shit, he was already drinking one of the bottles of gin. Who could blame him? When they got back to Leslie's apartment, they found they had nothing but band-aids, like if you got a cut on your finger. Nothing that would really help the removal of a face. They figured they would put some alcohol and some towels and lie Eugene down and put it on his face. Barman says going to the hospital right now is useless. They're bound to be overcrowded with screamers and their families, let alone victims of violence because of them. They all agreed, and Leslie takes Chuck aside after Shitty and Angel were putting back shots like college kids. She asks Chuck, what are they doing here? Just sitting around waiting to die like that old song? She was crying, and Chuck doesn't really respond. He comforted her and asked what she wants to do. She says if she wants to leave this world, she wants to leave it full. No more emptiness. The boy grinded up the remains of the girl. The man had showed him how to handle human remains a year ago, so this wasn't that big of a deal. What was a big deal was the actual killing not minutes ago. When he had done it earlier today, he brought the young girl before the man, and the boy hesitated with the butcher knife. The man says maybe he'd rather shoot her. No shame in that, as the man had shot his first kill too. The boy says no, he can do it, almost offended. He went up to the young Veal and she begged him. Please, she said. This infuriated the boy. How dare she beg for her life? It was paramount to asking him to stay a boy forever. He grabbed the Veal's hair so hard and ripped some of it from her scalp, causing blood to pour down her face. As he does this, the boy felt his loins alight. Open your eyes, he said to the Veal. Open your eyes. She opened them, her corneas bloodshot. He quickly slid the knife in the young girl's throat, and her blood washed away his innocence, it covering his hands. The old Veal screaming for her daughter in the corner. In an instant, the Veal was no longer human. Now, just meat. The man had never been so proud of the boy. He didn't say it, but he certainly felt it. That night, they had eggplant parm with tomato sauce. That sounds actually so good as I'm writing the script, holy shit. The man also gave him some cake, and the next couple days, he was allowed to eat whatever he wanted. The man actually asked him what he wanted to eat for dinner. The man also started letting him go into town with him to farmers markets to sell the meat and the vegetables. He also taught him how to play blackjack and poker. When they went into town, the man would allow him to go to the arcade and play some video games as well as check out books from the library. The meat they sold was considered pork. The man had a license to sell pork as long as they didn't check. He was allowed to sell human meat as pork, and no one was the wiser. I feel like that would taste different, but what do I know? I've never eaten human, so maybe it tastes the same. The man says that the USDA actually doesn't check because a lot of people keep the recipes in the family, and after the first few batches of pork that was actually pork years ago, they don't check his stuff anymore. He has a fake label maker and everything as well. The man explains that he has to do the talking when they sell it at the farmers markets though. He knows exactly what to say about the meat and all the right answers. He says he sells human because carnivores are all the same anyway. They eat the meat and take the life without thinking about it. But pigs are just as smart as humans, so humans are just as fair game to him. One day on a trip home from the farmer's market, the man let the boy sit on his lap and they hugged. The boy was happy. The only person he loved was proud of him. The man thought of the boy as his son, and the feeling was more than mutual. The next chapter starts with all the members of the bar watching the TV. A scientist talks about how the scream was first thought to be a result of global warming. It was just as Eugene had said in the beginning. It was a long-dead disease that was released from an ice cap due to the warming of the Arctic Circle. During this interview, however, a bunch of people say it's liberal propaganda. After this, the camera cuts to the nation's capital in flames. Shitty laughs and says, "Good, fuck 'em. Eat the rich. All the Democrats and Republicans deserve it," he says. Barman puts his face in his hand and says, "The damn Anthropocene apocalypse." Shitty asks what the hell Anthropocene means. Barman says it's the current period in time where the humans rule over the Earth. Soon, the Earth will return to animals. Chuck leaves Leslie's room and sees Angel chewing on her nails. Chuck asks if she wants some ketchup with her fingers, and she tells him to shut up. Chuck says he wants to talk to her in the kitchen real quick. They go that way, and Barman watches as he sorts through weapons, such as knives and hammers. Chuck whispers to Angel, "How much you charge?" She says, "You've got to be kidding. She is not doing this. The world is ending." She asks, why doesn't he just fuck his girlfriend over there? He says, well, actually, this was her idea, actually. Angel says, what, like a threesome? He says, yeah, something like that. He says, how about this? Angel is staying in Leslie's house, so this is payment. Chuck then says, it's like the saying, put out or get out. Angel cries from being abused like this. She blinks away the tears and says, fine. As this happens, a knock at the main door startles them all. Barman picks up a butcher knife and gets ready. From the other side of the door comes, Chuck, it's me, Brittany. A 17-year-old girl? Chuck opens the door and another woman is there too. Who's this? Chuck asks. The woman says her name's Keisha. They watched her husband kill himself down the stairs the other day. Barman asks, are these friends of yours, Chuck? Leslie answers for Chuck and says, no, they're neighbors. They ask to come in and Leslie says, no. Barman says they seem to be in real need of a place right now. Leslie says everybody is. They can't just go letting anybody in. Shitty lecherously looks them up and down and says, maybe we should reconsider. Just then, loud banging came from around the corner of the hallway just outside their apartment. Two children, one in a Superman t-shirt and one with glasses, their mouths and jaws hanging open from screaming. Chuck realized that Keisha has a box cutter and Brittany was limping. They were running away from these two children. Chuck quickly got them inside and slammed the door shut, but Superman's hand made it through and forced the door open, even though the boy was only 13-ish. Barman sliced Glass's head right open, and Chuck hit Superman with a chair. A huge fight ensues with people slashing at the children, the knife bouncing off their ribs as if they didn't even care. Barman gets Glasses with a knife, and Leslie gets a chair and slams her full body weight into Superman. Right before she crushes the boy's neck, though, Eugene tells her to wait. They all look over at Eugene, whose face was still shredded, and he sat up, somehow alive. No one noticed him sit up during the scuffle. He says maybe they shouldn't kill him. Maybe they could study them. Leslie calls Eugene a fool, and then crushes the boy's neck with her body weight. The kid noticed it when the man was undressing. He had a vicious wound on his leg, a bite mark that looked horribly infected. The man says, yep, it was a pig. Ornery one too at that. But it wasn't the pig's fault, he says. The wound had gone from purple to a viscous red. The teeth mark had grown almost into a singular wound. The boy tells the man to do something about this wound. It looks horrible. The man says, oh, he's gonna do something, and he takes out a bottle of whiskey and just drinks it. The man says he can't trust doctors. They make money treating you. Of course they want to keep you sick, he says. Soon after, the boy's workload on the farm doubled as the man could no longer work. The man let the boy go into town alone, even taught him to drive. He tells the boy that he has to do the talking now. The man tells him all the right answers to all the questions and tells the boy to just tell the usual customers that the man fell ill or something. He doesn't want them to think ill of the pigs. He doesn't mind if they think that the man is a loser klutz. The man almost cries at his own words. Time only made it worse, though. The boy tells the man that he has to go to the doctor, but he just turns away. The boy says he's been reading medical books at the library, and it looks like he has something called necrotizing fasciitis. It causes fever, throwing up, deliriousness, and eventually, death. He says the man has to go to the doctor. The man takes another swig and says he'll be fine. A couple of days later, the boy is in the barn, and Avil tells the boy she'd do anything. The boy started feeling some sort of way towards the veal, looking at her body. The boy was growing up and felt weird about the veal's bodies now. The man had been incapacitated for a while, and this was the last veal he had kidnapped. They had been talking for a while. Anything, she says. So the boy asks her, do you know how to mate? The woman asks, do you mean sex? He nods. The veal says, yes, of course, they can do that. Anything. She looked about 17, and the boy says, okay then. Yes, teach him sex. She tells him to take off his pants, and he does so and gets excited, his heart racing. The veal says, well, he needs to unlock her leg chain so she can, spread her legs. The kid does so, and quickly the veal grabs his balls and almost crushes them. The boy falls backwards in pain, and the veal runs. The boy took a second to get up, and the boy ran after her. He had to try to get the man's attention. He recovered after a few seconds and walked out of the barn, but before he could scream for the man, a crack of thunder rang out, and the veal fell. The man pointing a hunting rifle out the window. Get that bitch before she runs again! The boy hobbled over to her and got her back in the barn. And at that moment, he didn't really care if she died. She just hurt him and betrayed his trust. All the veal are the same. A while later, he talks to the man, and the man says, well, he supposes it's his fault. The boy thought he'd be furious, but instead, the man was more sad. The boy quickly out, can you teach me how to mate? The man looked bashful, almost coy. He says, bring that bitch in the room before she dies. Chuck looked at Eugene and asks if he still wants to study the bodies now. And Eugene just says, no. He's going to go to the bathroom and tend to his face. Barman says, trust me, Eugene, you don't want to look. Eugene asks if it's really that bad, and Barman says it's worse than he thinks. They argue a bit about throwing bodies out the window instead of studying them. A lot of people say that it's a good idea to throw them out, but Barman says they can't be savages. These are children still. They can't just throw the bodies out a window. They all take a vote, and everyone votes to throw the bodies out of the window, except for Barman, who has to reluctantly agree with the majority. Leslie takes Chuck by the hand and leads him to the bedroom and gets pissed. She says she wants to be full. Anything to fill this hole in her soul. Chuck says, really? She's mad at everyone because she hasn't had the big fuck yet? Chuck then figures maybe seeing those two children die and the boy in the street is getting to her. She said she wants to be full. Get Angel in here, Leslie says. Chuck grabs her and tells her it's time, and she angrily follows. Leslie is already bent over on the bed, but she tells Chuck to come over and whisper something into his ear. Chuck couldn't believe what she told him. Chuck lifted Shitty onto the bed after. Talking him into joining this weird little orgy took some convincing, but Chuck questioned whether the homeless man with no working legs had been with a woman in the past 10 years even, so he figured he would do it. Listen, I'm not going to describe this scene in detail, but know that Leslie is sucking Chuck's dick, Shitty is jerking off over them, and Angel is fisting Leslie. This is going on when it happens again. Angel starts screaming. When Shitty finishes on her face, Chuck thought it was because she was grossed out, but she began screaming, with her fist still inside Leslie. She yanked and pulled around at Leslie's insides, and before they knew it, Chuck grabbed Angel's face and punched it until it turned yellow. And then, he quickly snaps her neck. Barman rushes in the room with a knife over his head, but it was already over. They all helped to get Angel's dead hand out of Leslie, and they eventually got it out with Leslie moaning in pain, blood dripping from her anus and Angel's hand. She now had both internal and external scars. Literally. Barman says normally any other day walking in on a doubly penetrated woman and a dead body would probably rattle him pretty good, but not today. They all exit and let Leslie rest. Chuck asks if the TV had said anything new. Barman and Eugene say not really, just talking heads and politicians. Chuck asks if Barman thinks this is it. Is this the end of the world? Barman says he thinks it's more likely evolution. When a species is no longer needed on Earth, nature finds a way to kill it off. Usually a little slower than this, but it feels like this. Humanity has shown its evil in recent times, destroying the planet. And now, the planet is fighting back. Okay, Barrett Wallace. Eugene then emerges and says he knows exactly what's actually going on now. Chuck laughs at him, but he says he has it on good authority that this disease is an STD. They call him crazy, but he says he listens to this podcast, and he says the whole ice cap thing is fake news anyway. The scream is an STD that you can only get rid of if you dump it on someone else before you show symptoms. They all say he's crazy and just stop talking. Barman says that is exactly what they thought about AIDS in Africa before, and that was all bullshit too. They thought having sex with a virgin would cure it too, but it was just an excuse for more people to do evil. Eugene says, well, a virgin would be exactly what they need to get rid of this, as he points to Brittany. Barman pushes Eugene against the wall and says he's only saying that so he can sexually assault a young girl. Fucking sicko. The police can't do anything now, so he can just do fucked up shit because he can. Barman says he will rip what's left of Eugene's face off if he suggests that shit again. Eugene says it was just an idea. Keisha comes up and asks what's the commotion going on here. Barman pushes Eugene back and says they were just setting a few things straight. The man coached the boy on how to have sex by watching. There's a whole scene about it, but just know the man coaches the boy as he rapes the veal. He tells him to finish in her because he actually has an idea. That wasn't the weird part, though, the boy thought. What was really weird was how the boy added to his chore list to keep him having sex with the veal every day. The veal survived the gunshot wound, and the boy did as he was told every day. He then realized that he would never talk to another veal after what happened. They were just meat to him now. They were truly different from him and the man. A day or two later, the boy was happy when the man told him to drive him into town to go to a pharmacist. Maybe if the pharmacist said the same thing as the boy, the man would finally listen. However, when they got there, the man tells the boy to drive into the alleyway and wait for him. Because he's not going to see the pharmacist, he's going to rob the place for antibiotics. The boy protests, but the man says the boy has never robbed a store before, so it has to be him. Just wait in the alley. He said it so forcefully, it reminded him of when he first got to the farm. So, the boy listened and waited. The man said right before he got out of the car, "I know you mean well, but this is something I gotta do myself, son." The man hobbled into the pharmacy and the boy just waited nervously for him to reappear. The boy wished he'd said something to the man if this was truly the last time he was ever going to see him, but as he waited for him to return, finally he did, moving faster than the boy thought he could, and he was holding a white bag. The boy was so relieved to see him, he got in the car and told the boy to drive. He got the antibiotics, and even better, he got a surprise for the boy, and he holds up a home pregnancy test. Later that day, the boy waited for the test to be complete, and when it was, he was upset. He shows the man, and the man says, "Good job, boy. Humped her like a real man. Now, she's pregnant." The boy says he don't want to be a daddy, but the man laughs and says he isn't going to be one. The plan is this. The veal now gives milk. Then when the baby comes out, they can sell it as special meat, gourmet or something. The boy is confused. All of that work for just a little bit of meat? It made no sense. The man gets up and says, "Listen, maybe the baby will die after birth, and then they can mince it up and sell it as meat. But if it bothers the boy so much, they can think of something else." The boy felt a lump in his chest, and the boy says, "I ain't worried about the veal, I'm worried about you. I think the wound on your leg is making your head not work right." The boy winced in anticipation from the beating he was going to get from saying something like that to the man, but it never came. The man says, "Maybe you're right, boy." The man says he didn't so much worry about dying, but he's worried about leaving the boy alone in this cruel world. He says, "How about this? He'll keep this one baby, but tomorrow night, he's going to do a ride along with the kid and show him how to kidnap the veal." Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. The man says he hasn't been treating the kid right. He hasn't been treating him like the man he's become. They embrace, and the man says, "I love you, son." And the boy cries and says, "I love you too, Pa." In this moment, he was scared to call the man his father, but it felt right to call him that. He used to only call him Sir, but this felt right in the moment. Keisha pulled Chuck aside and says she needs to talk to him. He knew she wanted to ask about what happened to Angel, but she held her tongue. She says she can't stay here. Chuck looks at her questioningly. She says she can tell he's a good man. He helped her with her husband the other day when he didn't have to. Chuck thought to himself that he is not a good person. Women had been wrong about that his entire life before, too, for some reason. She says she has 2 babies. Twins, a boy and a girl. They're at home with their grandmother in their apartment. Keisha cannot stay here. She says she has to leave, go down the hall, and get back to her babies. Chuck says, shit, he doesn't know about this. She says, fine. Can she at least take one of the knives? Chuck says, hold on, he didn't say no. But in return, he wants cigarettes. She says, okay, she's been trying to quit, but she does have some in her house. Barman overhears this conversation and jumps in saying he'll escort her there instead. Screamers could be anywhere out there. Chuck says no, he has to do it. He needs the cigarettes. Barman says he'll do it and still give him the damn cigarettes. Barman leans in close and says, Chuck, you have to take care of Leslie. I don't care if she's not your wife or your girlfriend or if you're just friends with benefits or whatever. You are together, and you need to take care of her, all the same. Chuck thought it was a funny time for the barman to grow conscience, but Chuck thinks internally that maybe he should help Leslie out, though. She is a good woman. She just achieved what she wanted to do in this world, and she might be dying in there depending on the injury. Chuck says the barman should take Brittany, too. Keep her away from Jean. It's safer in Keisha's apartment. Barman says he agrees. She is not safe in here with Chuck and Jean. Chuck says, what did he do? Then he says, he gets it. Barman just wants her to himself. Barman gets close to Chuck and says, I'm asexual, you idiot. Chuck laughs and says, what, you're a virgin then? Barman says he doesn't have sex. It doesn't mean he's a virgin, you fucking idiot. Chuck says, whatever. As long as Barman gets the smokes, he doesn't care anymore. It doesn't matter. There's only one type of person in this world. People who die. Chuck left and tried to open the door to the bathroom with Leslie in it, but she didn't respond. Chuck holds his breath, thinking she dies, and he enters. Come in, she says weakly. Chuck sighs a sigh of relief. She's not dead. He asks how she's doing, and she says, bad. She sort of smiles, though, and says, she put holes in my colon. She says she wants to go to bed, though. The pain is too great. So Chuck gets her up while she's naked and helps her into the bedroom. She says she doesn't care if anyone sees her naked. Nothing matters anymore. She gets to her bed, but Angel's body is still on the floor in a star pattern. Chuck didn't want Leslie's assaulter to be in the room while she rests, so Chuck opens the window to a beautiful day, except for the black plumes of smoke on the horizon. Chuck says, well, ain't it a beautiful day in the fucking neighborhood? He throws Angel's light body out of the window to where she hits a car on the way down. Chuck asks how Leslie is, and she says she has a mangled asshole. How does he think? She asks for a smoke. Chuck says they're all out now, but Barman is going to help Keisha help her babies and get some smokes. Leslie perks up a bit and says, what did you say about babies? She says Chuck better help Keisha and Barman getting back to her babies. Chuck says Barman is on it. It's fine. He doesn't have to. Leslie says no. Chuck better help him. Chuck sighs and agrees. Leslie says Chuck better swear on his mother that he will help Keisha get back to her babies and protect them. Chuck says he'll do her one better. He'll swear on his father. Leslie says all fathers are bastards, but Chuck just says, not mine. He leaves the room and tells Barman right before he goes that Leslie is pretty bad in there. She probably has a perforated bowel. It could get infected and she could get sepsis and die. Barman says, yep, that is a possibility. A pit opens up in Chuck's stomach. The thought of Leslie dying hurt him. At any other point in his life, he wouldn't care. But he finds himself caring about Leslie. Barman says maybe they can find a doctor for Leslie, or at least find some antibiotics after all of this. Chuck smiles and says, yeah, rob a pharmacy or something. Barman says it's not robbing if you need it in a time of crisis, but they can handle that after they get Keisha to her children. They all listen at the door and they say they don't hear any screamers right now, though. Barman says, well, maybe they evolved or something. Could be silent now to hunt better. They all step up to the door and get ready. And as they do, Shitty comes up and says he wants to go too. Chuck says that he just slow him down. Shitty says, no. He saw the day outside. It's beautiful. He doesn't like what the world is turning into. He doesn't want to die doing the nasty like he almost just did. He doesn't want to die being shitty. He wants to die as the person his ma and pa raised. Paul Bartholomew Shuck, not Shitty. He wants to feel the wind on his face one more time and be done this day. On this beautiful day. Chuck just says whatever, it's his choice. And Shitty says yes, it is my choice. Chuck thought that Shitty isn't even going to make it through the day. But he'd be dying a hero, getting all the screamers out of the hallway so Keisha can get to her room to her babies. They open the door and Shitty says, thanks for the drinks. He rolls out there. Chuck figures he might not even make it to the elevator. Barman says, you should go out there with him, Chuck. Chuck says, fuck that, Shitty knows what he's doing. Barman says, no he doesn't, he's dumber than Eugene even. Chuck says, well, maybe they should have just thrown Eugene out instead. And Barman asks that he thought that Chuck and Eugene were friends. And Chuck says, Eugene thinks he's Chuck's friend, but in light of recent events with Brittany, it's no longer mutual. Shitty quickly turns around and wheels back to the apartment frantically. Chuck says they gotta close the door, he probably attracted the screamers and wants to get back in. Barman says no way, he's a person still, and Chuck says yeah, but we have 6 people in here. He's just one. As Barman considers this, the bones crack on Shitty's face and he begins screaming. He has become a screamer. They try to slam the door, but Shitty gets one of his arms in there. They try to shove him out, but Shitty bites Barman's leg and gets inside. Keisha musters courage for her children and makes a makeshift flamethrower with hairspray and a lighter. It quickly melts Shitty's face in the doorway, and he falls quick. One more of them has now turned and died. They collect themselves and find out that the door's lock broke when they tried to shove Shitty out. They were no longer safe in this apartment. Barman says, fine. They all have to go to the other apartment then. Eugene says, wait, with a rictus grin. Shitty bit your leg, Barman. It's like a zombie. You got saliva in your wound. Barman says to shut the fuck up with the zombie shit, Eugene. But Chuck sort of agrees with Eugene, though. Barman says fine, he'll go alone with Brittany and Keisha. Brittany got up from her fetal position in the kitchen, but soon realized that Eugene wasn't trying to keep her here for safety purposes. Barman says he's not afraid to kill Eugene over this issue of raping that young girl. Eugene says, what happened to his humanitarian personality? Wouldn't killing him go against that, Barman? Barman opens the door and ignores Eugene and leaves. They found the veal at the mall, the same one the boy had been taken from all those years ago. It's come full circle, son, like fate. Can't escape it, the man says. Even if the man could walk, he wasn't going to go into the mall with the boy to find a veal to kidnap. This was all the boy this time. The boy walked in his mall cop uniform. The man said in the right light, he could pass for 20, him being strong and big from working on the farm from the past however many years. There were tons of veal all over the mall, all different shapes, sizes, and colors. He approached the fountain and felt a sickening feeling of deja vu come over him. He could almost feel the hand on his shoulder when he found his target. A veal, maybe just 14, had just left her friends. A brunette. He goes up to her and says, young lady, we have you on camera shoplifting. You're going to have to come with me so we can sort this all out. The girl clutched her bag as if she really did shoplift something. Did the boy get lucky? He wonders. Are you gonna tell my mom? The young veal asked. The boy said just to come with him when they'll get it all sorted out. They left the main mall and the veal started to get suspicious. She asks, where are you taking me? The mall is back over there. The boy kept walking and said, they're gonna go to the mall office. It's just across the parking lot. The veal stopped though and started looking really suspicious, but they were almost out of sight from the mall. She makes a break for it, but the boy quickly takes out his bottle of chloroform and pours it onto his own hand. No time to get the rag. He covers her mouth with his hand so she cannot scream, and she struggles and bites his hand hard, but he keeps it there through the pain. She struggles and in turn breathes really hard, making the knocking out process really quick. She quickly goes limp. He looks around to see if anyone saw her, and he takes her back to the van. The proud tears in the man's eyes said everything about the boy, but he continues. Good catch, son. And a ballsy one at that. From now on, I'm gonna be living through you. You'll be doing the hunting, processing, fucking, and everything for me. The boy says, come on, Paul, you're gonna pull through with the medicine, and we can do it together. As men. The man tears up and says, yeah, as men. After a decent chunk of the trip back to the farm, the veal starts to wake up. She begins to scream, but quickly realizes that no one can hear her. She then begins to whimper quietly. It reminds the boy of when he was first taken almost. Once they get back to the farm, the boy asks what are they going to do with her? And the man says, this is your catch. You decide. Then the man says, she is a young'un though. Almost too young for mating. As my Uncle Merle said, if she can bleed, she can breed. And if there's no grass on the front, put it in the dirt in the back. Jesus Christ, why did I just fucking read that out loud? The man gets out of the van and says, you two lovebirds have fun now. The veal hears this and starts to panic. The boy puts a collar on her and leads her to the barn, and she gets on the ground in a fetal position and won't move. The boy kicks her hard and says if she doesn't move, he'll kill her right here. But she continues to not move. He then drags her hard into the barn. He's pissed. He's had enough. He picks her up and bends her over the meat grinding station, but she squirms and thrashes. She turns on the meat grinder in her thrashing and begins punching the boy hard, but it does very little to him. He shoves her aside and her hand gets stuck right in the meat grinder. She obviously freaks out and the boy pushes her harder, the skin from the meat on her hand getting processed into pink noodles on the other side of the grinder. He pulls her out and throws her to the ground, passed out. Her hand missing 2 fingers now, but the entire hand itself skinned. He covers up her top half with a sheet and unbuckles his pants. Barman took Keisha and Brittany down the hallway. Chuck watched from the doorway. He thought about how much younger Brittany looked right now, inexperienced and so terrified of what was going on. Keisha, on the other hand, was the opposite. Despite only being around 25, Chuck figures, She looks a lot older now because of her experience and what she's had to go through and her need to see her children, a quiet resolve in her eyes. Eugene sat petting a cat that has never been mentioned before, by the way, while he waited in Leslie's apartment, and they waited for the three down the hallway. Eugene says, "Ignore them, Chuck. Just have a drink with me." Chuck says he needs to make sure they all make it. Barman needs to get back so he can help him get stuff for Leslie. Eugene says, "They're all already dead, Chuck." Barman chose his fate when he tried to fight me about fucking the blonde. Chuck holds his tongue. Eugene then rants about how that girl is their savior by having sex with her, and how teenagers are fetishized in media. Chuck finally just says, "Eugene, shut the fuck up." Chuck is still watching as the group in the hallway make it close to the door. They get close, but then suddenly a scream rings out. From inside the apartment, an old black woman with a white afro runs at them. She bats the chair out of Barman's hand and puts her hand around Keisha's throat and drops her makeshift flamethrower. It was Keisha's mother who was with the babies. Barman pulls out the butcher's knife and stabs Keisha's mother in the chest. Keisha then falls to the ground and cries at the sight of her mother getting stabbed. "She's got the scream, she's not your mother anymore," Barman says. Keisha, out of reflex or some thought that she could be cured or something, picks up a broomstick nearby and whacks Barman in the face as he's stabbing her mother. And because Barman wasn't expecting it, it hits him hard and breaks his nose. "Fuck!" Chuck yells as he runs out of Leslie's apartment. He was surprised by his own reaction to all of this, and he tries to run and save Barman from Keisha's mother. But Keisha's mother, noticing Barman is stunned, lunges at him and wraps her legs around him and sinks her teeth into his neck. Chuck is rushing towards them when a huge shadow comes out of one of the other apartment doors. A hulking man, obese and huge, jaundiced and clearly a screamer, takes notice of Chuck running. Chuck had a hammer, and suddenly his weapon didn't seem all that useful in his hand. Chuck ran towards the group as the rhino of a man behind him starts rushing him, but he was slow. But he was linebacker charging him. Chuck manages to get to them and stabs Keisha's mother off Barman and tells him to get up and ready for the rhino guy. Chuck asks what they can do against that charging rhino, and Barman says he's got no idea. Barman picks up a chair and tries to almost slam it into the rhino man's head as he charges, but it just shatters on his balding head and he doesn't stop. Chuck yells for Keisha to get out of the way as she is crumpled on the ground crying about her mother. She gets up at the last second, and she would have been fast enough to run away from the man, but she slips on her own mother's blood. The rhino man charges straight into Keisha, and she really didn't have a chance. She is slammed beneath the rhino man, and her bones get crushed, her neck bend a weird way, and she bleeds out of her neck and vomits. The rhino man gets off of her body and starts charging Chuck and Barman now, and they realize they have to move. But Barman purposely gets hit so he can stab the rhino man in the eye, thinking it'll stop him. But he still doesn't stop. He grabs Barman, and Barman tries to slice and stab in his face, but he gets like Hulk smashed onto the ground. The rhino man then takes Keisha's body off the ground and slams it into Barman. Chuck runs around the rhino man to now his blind side to try to get Barman free. Chuck jumps up and bayonets the rhino man in the neck, and finally, the rhino man slumps down. He looks over at Barman and winces. He's on the ground and he looks really bad. Wounds on his neck, arms, and legs, all bleeding all over. Chuck says he needs to get Barman out of the hallway, into the apartment. But Barman says the fucker broke his back. His insides are all messed up and he can hardly breathe. He says these words with a high-pitched hiss with every word. Barman says, "Take my hand, Chuck. I have to say something to get off my chest." Barman then says, "I deserve this. I'm a horrible man." Chuck says that's bullshit. He's been the best of the group, helping everyone he can and being truly kind. Barman then says a speech that I will read in full because it's quite a shock to his character. Chuck, I hurt young women. I'm a rapist. He spits the words out like spoiled milk. I was young. Stupid. I didn't attack them or anything like that, but I still raped them. I couldn't take the guilt of it anymore. I date raped them. 3, I think. A friend of mine taught me how to do it. Putting stuff in their drinks so I could have my way with them after they passed out. Roofies, sedatives, and sleeping pills. He winced, face tight with pain. Never got busted. The girls knew what had happened to them, but they never reported the rapes. Most never do. Only this one girl confided in her parents. You know what they did? They told her to keep it a secret and gave me a warning to never tell anyone. See, they didn't want to hurt the family's good name by her being a rape victim, as if it was her fault. Poor thing stayed silent for months before killing herself. If any other girls ever told friends or family they'd been sexually assaulted, it never came back to bite me in the ass. I wish it had. I wish I'd paid for what I did to them. The guilt made me hate myself, hate the world, and I couldn't stand having sex anymore. I stopped caring about everything. It's why I am the way I am. Why I lived with so much hate inside. It's why I don't deserve a life, or even a name. A series of harsh coughs rang out as he turned and spat blood. That poor girl killed herself because of what I did to her. My orgasm was worth more than her life. Shit, Chuck. What kind of God would let me live and her die? Chuck says that Barman was young and stupid, and really it's his friend's fault for teaching him that stuff. But Barman says that's bullshit, and even Chuck knows it. Barman finishes by saying, I treated them like pieces of meat. I was a pig. Chuck swallows and thinks he needs a drink now. He needs Leslie and darkness and nothing else. But with his last words, Barman says, maybe that's what the scream's all about. God making up for his past mistakes. And then, Barman dies. The veal was now 6 months pregnant. She seemed to be getting ill, though. She vomited every morning and had bad diarrhea. It didn't seem to be morning sickness. Though the veal seemed to be getting even sicker. The man seemed to be getting a little bit healthier. Done saved my life, son, he told the boy. The boy said it was nothing, but he has to feed the pregnant veal tonight. He didn't want to deal with another 3 months of this shit, though. When he got to the veal, he threw a bowl of rice and vegetables and a dog bowl down for the veal and told her to get eating. She didn't respond. He checked her body temperature, and she seemed cold. He stuck 2 fingers inside of her, and it was still warm, though. But the boy knew she was dead. He was annoyed, but not too upset. 6 months for all that shit, and for what? He had to go tell the man. When he told him, the man was a little annoyed, too. He thinks, well, maybe they could cut the baby out and test its tenderness and eat it. The boy puts his hands on his hips, saying, first of all, they don't eat meat. But eating that baby that was just in a sick woman? That seems just not very smart. The man says, maybe you're right, son. He says before the boy got to the farm, a lot of his pigs came down with something and passed it on to other pigs. He wonders if the veal passed whatever sickness she had to the other veals that the boy had recently kidnapped. They have to kill them all. And for the first time, the boy was a little scared to be on the farm because of all the sickness. Later that day, they went out of the house and started digging a hole for the grave for the pregnant veal. They had to bury her so she didn't infect anybody else. It was nighttime by the time they started digging. The boy made a hole 3 feet long and 4 feet deep. The man told the boy that 6 feet under is too deep and it's backbreaking labor, but 4 feet is just deep enough so if the police come here looking, they won't find the bodies. As he dug the hole, the boy was reminded of a time when he first got to the farm, and he had to bury a veal. The man was a lot meaner to the boy back then, or more strict at least. He remembers trying to get a worm out of a pile of dirt to spare any life at all. The boy thinks how silly that was now. Killing it would have been more of a mercy. As he was thinking this, a pair of headlights came down the dirt road from the farm. Who is that, Pa? He asks. The man says he doesn't know. He's gonna go get the gun and check it out. The boy hears arguing over there as he's digging and then decides to go over. But as he starts to walk over, a finger grabs his leg. Oh shit, the veal was alive. She wasn't dead after all. He tries to get free of the veal who is under the ground and he quickly continues putting dirt over her so no one could hear her. As he does this, a gunshot rings out and he runs away screaming, Pa! He ran over, horrified for his guardian. He grabs an axe from the barn and runs towards the arguing and the gunshot, his heart breaking for his father. But a root hits his foot and he trips and throws the axe. A flashlight beam blinds him as someone says, "Put your hands up!" And so, the boy did. Hoping maybe if he complied with these police officers or whoever this was, they would spare his father. Cuffs are slapped on the boy when one of the cops says, Jesus Christ, it's just a kid. Chuck slid down the wall. Him and Brittany were now the only two left, except for Leslie and Jean, who were in the other apartment. Chuck finds the pack of smokes in the apartment and a lighter, and he grabs it. He got the cigarettes he wanted. Brittany asks if they're safe, and Chuck just says, I think so. Brittany takes out the rest of the weed she got from Chuck and asks if he wants to smoke the rest of the weed with her. Chuck says he hasn't smoked weed in a very long time, but he figures it's the end of the world. Why not? Him and Brittany discuss how, weirdly, humankind brought this upon itself. It's the only mass extinction that it was caused by the species who was getting wiped out. If this disease was truly from the ice caps that were melted by humans, we kind of deserve it, huh? Chuck tells Brittany to light the joint, but he'll be right back. He has a promise to Leslie to keep. He walks in the room where he thought the babies were in, and suddenly, he got a horrible thought. Oh no, their grandmother killed them. I don't hear the babies crying. He looks around and finds two babies in the crib. One cooed, and Chuck sighed a sigh of relief. They were alive. Chuck? A voice said. Chuck, for some reason, thought this was one of the babies at first, but then looks behind him and sees Brittany. She says, oh, thank God they're okay. Chuck says it's good that they're okay, but he has to get back to Leslie now. She's bleeding badly. Brittany says she doesn't want to be alone in here, though. Please. Chuck just says he'll be back, don't worry. Brittany just has to watch them while he gets Leslie to a hospital. Brittany says stop. She doesn't want to die a virgin. Chuck stops in his tracks. He says two things. One, there's no way a beautiful young girl like her is a virgin, and two, she would say anything to not be alone right now. It was the end of the world. She says there's a reason no boy has ever gone for her. She then asks if she can kiss Chuck. She does so, and then they start making out furiously, their hot breath on each other. Chuck thinks that, well, even if she has an STD, it doesn't matter. One, he's never gotten sick in his entire life, and two, even if he did, it was the end of the world. Who cared? That's gotta be the reason she was a virgin, he thinks. That is, until he starts undressing her and feels a lump in her pants. The unmistakable lump of a testicle and a penis. You're a guy? Chuck asks. Brittany says, no, she's a girl. Her genitalia doesn't decide who she is. Her soul does. She left her parents and moved here to get away and get a surgery before all this zombie shit happened. Chuck says, but she looks so girly? She says she's always had girlish features. She's never felt at home as Bentley. So, she came here and is now Brittany. She begins to cry. She says she moved here so she could live as she really was. But now all this happened and she couldn't even live the life she wanted to be anymore. She broke down in tears, and Chuck thought to himself about Barman, about how he talked about atonement in the end. But then he stopped thinking about that and started thinking about Brittany. She had a hole she needed to fill in the very end as well, just like Leslie. One only Chuck could. Besides, penis or no penis, Brittany was a lovely woman. It didn't tarnish his attraction to her. The book then goes into a whole page about how they had sex and how wonderful it was. After which, she stayed in the bed serenely. Chuck says it was lovely, but he has to get to Leslie now. She thanks him though. She says she knows that he likes women. Whole women, she says. Chuck says to shut up. This wasn't a pity fuck. It may have started out as one, but in the end, it truly wasn't for either of them. He tells Brittany to take care of the babies and he'll be back. She says she'll try. She says she'll try to be here when he gets back too. She'll stay alive. Chuck leaves the apartment and bile comes back up his throat looking at all the bodies from last night's massacre with the Rhino Man. He walks past Eugene's apartment and hears his mother screaming in it, and he just walks by. He gets back to Leslie's apartment and finds it locked. Leslie? Gene, open up, it's me. The door was barricaded. He hears a woman scream and kicks down the door. Leslie's in trouble. He knew he shouldn't have left Eugene with her. He opens the door to Leslie's bedroom and was surprised by what he saw. Eugene's corpse. Naked on the bottom of the bed. He was raping me, Chucky. Chuck ran over and hugged Leslie and says, well, she got him good, though, for that. And she shows Chuck a small taser. She says she tased his balls and then his chest a bunch. Figured it stopped his heart. He looked, and that looked about right. Leslie says she was worried that it wasn't okay. She killed him and he wasn't even a screamer. Chuck says it was obviously okay that she killed him. He was a rapist. He was crazy. Maybe more than any of them. Chuck says he has to get her up and go to the hospital because look at her. She's bleeding all over the bed. But she just says to stop. Look out the window. Fires rage. Looting was rampant. And a tank, a fucking army tank, was on fire in the street. That and the screaming. So much screaming. Chuck looked back at Leslie and she looked ghostly. She was bleeding horribly still. She says, if she has to die today, she doesn't want it to be being ripped apart by screamers. And even more so, she doesn't want Chuck to be ripped apart by screamers. She says, just patch her up slightly and get her a drink. She wants to die in peace. Chuck does so and patches her up slightly and takes her to the living room and they turn on the TV. Just a message saying all emergency services are down. Stay inside your homes. Behind that message was a large word. Pray. They drank and Leslie wheezed that at least they don't have to worry about going to their jobs anymore. She then stops laughing and looks at Chuck and asks, what do you think death is like? Chuck just says he reckons it's just nothing. She says, oh, you reckon? Sometimes you talk like a real hick, Chuck. You grow up in a barn or something? Chuck smiles at that notion. He says, death is like the opposite of everything. It's like sleep without dreams. It's just nothing. Nothing to be scared of. She says, no dreams, huh? No nightmares either, though, then. Death sounds wonderful to her. They stopped talking after that. The man had covered for the kid. He told the police everything was all him. The entirety of the farm was all him. It was all him. All the man. The boy was just another victim. That is what he told them. No Veal were alive to incriminate him either. The police chief comforted the kid, saying he was strong for getting through all of that. They contacted his mother and she's on her way here. The kid stayed silent in the questioning room. The chief says they're still trying to contact his father, though. His father, the boy thought. He hated calling him that. He hated calling anyone but the man that. They say, once again, that he must have been through a lot. They had come to arrest Quade Cruz because of fraudulent documentation for a meat distributor. So the violent resistance was a surprise. Shit, they knew the man's name, the boy thought. The boy says, yeah, they have the best meat in town. He says that they shouldn't have come on him and his pa's property. The chief says, yeah, she heard that he called Quade his father. The chief says that the boy was a missing person. He went missing in a shopping mall back in 1987. They show the boy his ID card, and the boy says he doesn't know the boy in the photo. The chief says, well, the fingerprints match. That's him. The boy seems to have something called Stockholm Syndrome, they tell him. The boy says, that's not true. I've been Quade's son half my life. He's more of a father to me than any of my blood relatives. The chief changes tactics and asks, how long has he been selling that meat? Does the boy know what type of meat it actually is? The boy, not wanting to implicate his pa anymore, just says, yeah, it's the best meat in town. A psychologist then comes in the room and says, hello, son, I'm here to examine you a bit. The boy says no one calls him son but his pa. The psychologist apologizes and says, okay, do you go by Charlie or Charles? So, yes. The boy from half of this story this whole time has been Chuck himself, if you didn't catch that by the clues by now. Half of the book is in Chuck's past, and half of the book is Chuck's future. The doctors say that it's a miracle that Chuck never developed any sickness from that farm. A squalid death camp is what they called it. His mother, now in the room, Chuck hardly recognizes anymore. His mother used to be so colorful, but now here she is gray and small. She says that Chuck never got diseases, not even as a kid, not even influenza or a cold. The police told him that they cured Quade's leg, but they also said that he had borderline leprosy. The woman was just so happy that her little Chucky was alive, her son. Chuck thinks it's dumb that she called him Chucky even though he was 16. And even worse, that she still considered him her son. He wanted his real parents back. His real parent back. Soon, he learned what the police wanted to hear. He learned how to talk to them. He wanted to talk to his real dad, though, so he tried to do anything to see him. They had told him about Quade Cruz, though. He was considered America's worst serial killer since Ted Bundy, whoever that was, Chuck thought. They even called him a cannibal. Chuck couldn't believe that. Pa never ate the food, only sold it. Days later, he learned that Quaid confessed to everything. Everything. Even worse, Quaid said to the media that the boy was just a slave. I would have killed him too if I wasn't sick. It was just free labor. This crushed Chuck. He knew that he didn't imagine it. He just wanted to go home to the farm again. But he was depressed about his paw. He thought maybe he should go to a mental hospital. He actually might need it. He went to that mental hospital for 8 months, and there he learned the jargon that they all used. He used all he could to see his paw again. He used words like closure and catharsis to the therapist just so he could see his paw again. At first, Quaid refused to see him, which crushed Chuck even more. But eventually, the warden offered him special treatment if he saw Chuck. Finally, Quaid Cruz agreed to see Chuck again. The next day, Chuck went to the maximum security prison where he would meet his paw once again. He waited behind the glass divider with the phone connected for talking between them, when a large metal sound rang out. The door opened. Chuck rose to his feet. Quaid sat down and says, "What do you want, kid?" Chuck says he wanted to see him. And a wet gleam appeared in Quaid's eyes. A warmth of a connection was made between them one more time. And at once, Chuck realized what Quaid was doing. He was saving his son. Quaid had to change the direction of the conversation, though, to not implicate Chuck. Through tears, Quaid says, and I will read this part in full, "Guess you feel bad about this," Pa said. "What with you being the only one I didn't kill? Guess you feel what they call survival's guilt. What do you want, kid?" he said in a monotone voice. The boy struggled not to be hurt. I'd wanted to see you. I had to see you." There was a sudden gleam in the man's eyes. They'd gone wet. A warm tingle went through the boy, and he licked his lips with cautious hope. "Well," Cruz said, "you've seen me. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you how much The man cut him off. "You don't need to tell me nothing, Chuck." Chuck was trying to say that he loved him, but kept suffocating on his own words, his chest too tight with the dual choke of affection and sorrow. But he knew Pa understood. He knew what Chuck felt, and Chuck could tell by the warmth in his Pa's eyes that he felt the same. But he turned the conversation in another direction. "Guess you feel bad about this," Pa said. "What with you being the only one I didn't kill. Guess you feel what they call survivor's guilt. Huh? Well, you're only breathing because I needed the work done at the farm." The man cleared his throat in an effort to take the edge out of it. His eyes remained wet, but he didn't allow a tear to fall. "I was busy snatching them girls off the street and killing them, not chopping them up. I needed you to do all the chores and killings to cover my crimes. Reckon you did alright stopping the boys and tending to the animals and whatnot. But I sure as shit couldn't trust you to help me with them girls. He was always trying to get me to let him go, you fucking crybaby." Pa's eyes never left Chuck, saying what his words weren't. Chuck swallowed back tears too. He understood now. Understood it all. "They sent you here, did they?" Pa asked. "Them coppers thought I might feel remorse for what I done to you. Especially because y'all been messed up with that Stockholm shit. Thinking I ever gave a flying fuck about you. Them coppers think you might still get something out of me, huh? Christ don't matter how much I gave them. They're always looking for more dirt, always trying to get me to talk." His eyes widened. "Always listening, you know." Chuck didn't know. He grasped the meaning completely. "But you and me know you can't tell them any more than I already have, kid. You don't know nothing about what I did to them girls because I took care of them all myself. Every one of them. They were my bitches. Mine. I never let the likes of you or anybody else near my bitches. Closest you ever came to them was when I was sick and I had you make deliveries for their meat. By then, I had your sorry ass whipped so scared I didn't even worry you'd turn me in." He started sniffling again. He faked a laugh to cover it. "You were too chicken-livered after all I'd done to you. Ain't that right, boy?" Chuck took a deep breath. "I was just another victim. I see that now." "Good." A flood of affection emanated through the divider, undetectable to anyone other than the man and the boy. "Glad we finally got this through your thick skull," Pa said. He leaned in close, his nose nearly touching the glass. "It's kind of fun to see you one more time, you little turd. But don't come back here no more, got me?" Chuck nodded. His soul ached. This would be the last time he'd seen his father, but it had to be this way. It was all clear now, this new truth. Though their visitation time was nowhere near over, Pa stood up, hung up the phone, and walked away from the booth, sneering for the guard to see, as if he'd been annoyed by the boy's visit. Chuck covered Leslie's body after it was over. He hadn't been this sad since they strapped Quaid Cruz to the electric chair, but Leslie made Chuck call all into question what his pa had taught him. Women were not veal, like his pa had shown him. Some were horrible people, but some were not, despite how different the two sexes were. Though, he says maybe they aren't so different, as he thinks about Brittany, who was formerly Bentley. He almost chuckles to himself, thinking that the last hope for two babies of Keisha's were 3 rapists, a crippled hobo, a teenager, a hooker, and a lush. All heroes have fangs nowadays, he thinks. Chuck hadn't raped or killed anyone in almost 30 years, and he didn't feel the need to anyway. But he thought of Barman's last moments, and he wondered if he was like that, deserving of that kind of redemption. But he laughed to himself. The barman was a real anti-hero, but he was just a cockroach. He thought about Leslie and how in the moment of her death, she accepted it. It was a beautiful thing. She danced with the Reaper too long to be afraid of it. He wondered if his own death would be as peaceful as hers. He took the taser, the knife, and a bottle of whiskey and headed back to Keisha's apartment. He thought about his paw. Now with the humanity dying out in this world, it would be returned to the animals. His paw would be happy about that. He got to the apartment and it was still open. He wondered if the dumb kid left it open. But when he got inside, he realized it was ransacked. Holes in the couch and the walls. Shit, she's turned, he thinks. He runs into the infant's room and a warm glow made it look serene. They were crying. Thank God they were alive. He wondered if Brittany turned and forgot all about the babies and ran out of the apartment. He did still worry that she might be in this apartment, so he drew his taser. He walked up to the babies, and what he saw shocked him. The baby in blue, the male twin, was wailing and scratching at his sister. Blood ran down his face. The boy had turned. What am I supposed to do now, Leslie? He thought. And then he thought, another man abusing a woman, go figure, as he sulked. He figured the taser would be the best option. A knife was brutal, and dropping him out the window was too hard to think about. The taser would stop his little heart instantly. He put the taser to the infant, and the shock illuminated the boy's eyes. It reminded him of the cattle prod he'd used on the veal and the pigs. That and how his paw died in the electric chair. Chuck grabbed breast milk out of the fridge and disposed of the body of the boy in a towel. He dripped a little of the breast milk into his whiskey and sat down and tried to feed the child. It was wailing horribly. Was it because babies just cry, or was this child becoming a screamer too? He could attract more, but he could do nothing about it but rock her and coo her to sleep. He then had a terrible thought. What if he became a screamer? He always assumed he was immune, but was that just arrogance because he'd never been sick in his life? Just then, the lights went out, and the fan above him stopped spinning. The power finally died. Nothing to do now but sit here and listen as the world died. He lit up a cigarette. The baby wouldn't live another few days anyway, probably, so the smoke didn't matter. He then wondered, what if he was immune? The last man on Earth, and he's a scumbag rapist, he thinks. That's funny. Now, like tradition, let us read the final page in full of They All Died Screaming. He left her alone in the apartment. Another screamer might hear, defeating the purpose. The taser in his pocket suddenly felt very heavy. Taking care of a baby took on a different meaning. There was little hope for life, but there was always mercy. He'd failed to show mercy to so many young girls. He'd been a child himself then. Everyone had told him that he was a victim too, just like those girls whose killings had been attributed to Quaid Cruz. Chuck's birth parents and shrinks had reminded him of his supposed victimhood until he was old enough to get away from them for good. While he didn't believe it, he had hazy memories of being in that dog cage in the basement. Things had been different for him and the man then. It was the women, the veal, who had brought them closer together. Man and boy, bonding through dehumanizing, defiling, and murdering the innocent. Chuck would not stoop to thinking of it as wrong that had been done to him by Cruz. Chuck had wanted to use the veal to fulfill his own needs, be they for sex, profit, or his initiated into manhood via slaughter. He had no remorse back then, and no real remorse had come to haunt him later in life. Their deaths had seemed just right at the time, even the death of the in utero veal, the gourmet, as Paul called it. Looking down at the crying infant in his arms, a baby's death seemed right again. He thought of Leslie's story about her husband killing himself and their children. Keisha's babies would be the loss of 2 more. they were the last children and Leslie's maternal instincts had reached with such light. So, for Leslie, he let the baby cry as night fell in full, as darkness wrapped itself around them. The sweet numbness of alcohol settled in, and the baby'd stopped crying so gradually he hardly noticed. The silence grew so loud he'd wondered if he'd gone deaf. Carrying the baby with him, he went to the window and stared out at a city without hope. The sirens had died down. The only screams were so distant they were mere echoes. And under the smell of ashes was an odor not unlike pig feces. Probably dead bodies, Chuck thought. The block was eerily calm, peaceful in the worst possible way. The sky offered no moon, no stars. Every window in the building was black. There wasn't even a tangerine glow of fires anymore. There was no longer light in this world, only a swarming, suffocating darkness with no end. He would give the baby one more night to dream in, then he would kill her too. It would be a mercy killing, unlike all the others he'd done, but it would be just as easy. Because if humanity wasn't doomed, the odds were good the infant wasn't the sort of girl who could grow up to be a real woman like Leslie was. It was far more likely she was just another veal. But that's it. That is Kristopher Triana's They All Died Screaming. I actually kind of love this book. A lot of splatterpunk books are quite flat and torture porn for the sake of torture porn, brutality for the sake of brutality. But every once in a while, something like this will shine through. There are some rather strange things in this book, and there's a lot of extreme themes. But Chuck as a character, and especially through his relationship with Quade Cruz, is fascinating. A character molded through evil who still tries to do good, but his own idea of good is still evil in the end. Almost every single character in this book is in some way broken. There is no completely good character, the closest probably being Brittany and Shitty, though we don't really have a whole lot to go on with either of them. And before we get into the full analysis of the themes, I want to do something we've never done before with an analysis. And that is, let us discuss each of the characters in depth and what they mean, because each of the characters in this book reflects an idea of evil in some way, shape, or form. So let's do that real quick before we get into the themes. Let's start with Chuck. Chuck is a surprisingly well-written character. A boy who started out innocent turns into a monster in the end, or rather pretty early in the book actually. Then when he tries to do good in the end, he still does evil, showing how corroded his entire life and moral code had become because of Quade. I believe he simply represents learned evil. Chuck was not evil in the beginning. He was innocent. But sort of like how we touched on in our last book review, The Son of the Slob, it takes both nature and nurture to make someone truly contemptible. Chuck is obviously a better written character than Harold in Son of the Slob, but in a way they are similar. They have grown up knowing nothing but contemptible evil things, which isn't their fault, and it becomes a matter of the cycle of abuse, which we will get into in the analysis. Quade is next, and this is going to sound weird, but don't take it that way. I kind of love him as a character. Completely evil person, but true father-son moments resonate with me for some reason, although that is not fully what this is. Quade is a sort of weird godlike figure to Chuck, someone that beats Chuck's mind into submission so hard that Chuck cannot even comprehend anything other than the evil he was taught. He gives Chuck positive reinforcement when he does what Quade says, and because Quade seems to have some morality to Chuck, especially when talking about animals, Chuck thinks that this person is to be idolized, because to Chuck, he loves animals, maybe a little too much, but he reflects society in the idea of love being a guise for evil. Because I do believe that Quade loved Chuck in some weird little way, and it's that love that destroys Chuck in the end. Love can be used as a vessel for evil. Something Kristopher Triana explores a lot more in the other book that we covered by him, Gone to See the Riverman. Leslie, weird enough, is a character that I both love and hate in a lot of ways. I feel she represents how evil corrupts. It starts as one small thing. Leslie likes sex and food, which on its own isn't necessarily bad. However, when her husband, Wayne, has to deal with depression, it makes it a little harder to get those two things she likes in this world. Wayne doesn't want to have sex, so she goes deeper. She has an affair to have sex, which is obviously horrible, but that evil isn't enough. It digs her in an even deeper hole. She then insults her husband because she's hurt. Her husband, who is obviously not well, kills himself and his children because of the evil that was done to him, compounding even more. She then tries to kill herself, but fail, causing even more evil. It just builds and builds and builds until we see that less than good person that Leslie is today. She's unable to ever be fulfilled because of how much she has been corroded by the horrible things that have happened to her. So in the end, I think she ended up going out in her own way and was happy and was, in a way, somewhat redeemed. Eugene is a little harder to place, but he is just sort of like my least favorite character. He is truly the most hated person in this book, in my opinion. I think it is Eugene that thinks he needs to be in control. He has to know what's going on. When he no longer knows all the answers, or thinks he knows all the answers, I guess, all bets are off. Because when sense and reason fail, nothing else matters. He can do what he wants, because sense and reason no longer have a place in a world devoured by this evil. Barman is next. I think Barman is my favorite character. Though none of the characters are truly redeemed, I believe that Barman probably gets the closest. Barman is a former rapist. He knows this, and accepts what he did. He understands how evil he is. However, he still attempts to do right in the end, sacrificing his life for Brittany and everybody else. He is truly the last voice of reason among the group, and he dies pretty early, so obviously it isn't going to end well. I don't know why, but I have a tendency to really like characters that are so past the point of redemption but attempt to anyway, even if it doesn't absolve them. I believe Barman is the voice of reason, and how when the world around you goes to shit, that voice of reason can easily be overshadowed and corrupted by evil. He is the last vestige of humanity, but time and time again, he is outnumbered by people who just don't care anymore, and are only in it for themselves. So in the end, he conforms too. Shitty is a hard one to place as well, as he is actually kind of like a good person, at least compared to the rest of them. He's just a homeless guy that knows his place, and he's kind of a breath of fresh air, ironically. I believe he represents acceptance, whether that be good or bad acceptance. He wants to die on his own terms, which was truly one of my favorite moments in the book, actually. He, like Barman, is conformity to evil and the world around him, though he chooses to go against it in the end, breaking that idea. However, something I want to touch on is Shitty is living proof that the world was dying and evil before the apocalypse even started, because the world failed Shitty, and in the end, he loved it anyways. The Veal aren't really a full character like the others, but a group. They are simply put, the victims of evil. Victims of rape, victims of misogyny, victims of dehumanization. They show how when you dehumanize a group of people, no matter who they are, they become so easily to throw aside when you have something you need. Because after all, if they're dehumanized to you, they aren't people to you. The end of the book, and the very last line, shows this about Chuck. Because after the whole book, you think Chuck might do something good. But once again, a woman is just a veal to him at the end. Brittany is the last main character, and she represents how easily youth and pure people are corrupted. Chuck and Eugene are, first of all, predators, but also show how easy it is to make a youthful and inexperienced mind like poor Brittany's to do evil. I wish we got more of her, actually, because I wanted to explore her character a bit more. She is innocent and corrupted by evil. Keisha is a good character, but she sort of doesn't really fit into my theory, because I can't really think of a way she interacts with evil. I think she is truly a good person. Someone who stands steadfast in a cruel world and tries to save her children and family. Maybe someone can help me out there with Keisha in the comments. Okay, now that we've gone over the characters, let us get into the real themes. First things first, let's all say it together, the cycle of abuse. This book, like nearly every work we've covered, shows how the cycle of abuse traps people and destroys anything it touches. It perpetuates violence and is nearly inescapable. Chuck is a victim, but through this cycle, he becomes the abuser just as much as Quaid did. So does nearly every character in the book. It's a very cynical look at humanity as well. Not that I'm agreeing with it, but it is what the book is implying. Next is something we sort of covered in the character analysis, but it is once again, when you dehumanize people, it's so easy to disregard them for any reason. If humanity can find a reason to justify cruelty, they will. Anything to get ahead of or satisfy your own needs. And it doesn't even take the apocalypse to do it. The world did this to people long before the Screamers came out. Just look at Shitty. The next theme is something I strangely covered in a very unknown video I made on a game back in January this year. That game was called Carcass. This theme, which is shown in this book and that game, is humanity, no matter what, will eventually kill itself. probably with something it created itself at that. The way of humanity nowadays is self-destructive. People are in it for themselves, and the natural conclusion of that is the planet cleansing us like a disease in time. Humanity will be its own undoing. The next one sort of piggybacks off of this whole cycle of abuse thing, but everyone, especially Chuck in this book, thinks of mercy as something good, because the idea of mercy is good. It's a good thing, right? Well, when someone has a mind like Chuck, and in this case all of humanity, mercy is not a good thing. It is evil disguised as good. Chuck, in the very first words of the book, spares a worm while digging a grave for the man. A truly good act. Later in this book, he reflects on this and thinks it was stupid he did that. It would have been a mercy to just kill it right there, he thinks. Mercy can be used just as much as an excuse as it can be used to be a good thing. Tons of people kill in this book or end up doing horrible acts in the name of mercy. And when the person giving mercy is morally evil, mercy is once again just another excuse. There are several more themes, I'm sure, but those are the main ones I can find. I really hope you liked this video because I actually really love this book. One of my favorite ones I've covered at that. What do you think? Do you like it? Hate it? What was with the Arby's beef and cheddar sandwiches? Let me know in the comments. I really do love you all, and I cannot believe we are at 65k subs. That is a huge number, and you are all heroes for letting me do this as a job. Words cannot describe how much you all mean to me. But until next time, I love you all, and I will see you then. Bye.